The Warning by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Isn't that a cool name? Beware, the Israelite of old who tore the lion in his path. When poor and blind, he saw the blessed light of heaven no more. Shorn of his noble strength and forced to grind, in prison, and at last led forth to be a pander to Philistine revelry. Upon the pillars of the temple laid his desperate hands, and in its overthrow destroyed himself, and with him those who made a cruel mockery of his sightless woe. The poor blind slave, the scoff and jest of all, expired and thousands perished in the fall. There was a poor blind Samson in this land, shorn of his strength and bound in bonds of steel, who may in some grim revel raise his hand and shake the pillars of the commonweal, till the vast temple of our liberties, a shapeless mass of wreck and rubbish, lies. In this part, this is an example of one of the questions. You're going to read the lines from the poem. When poor and blind, he saw the blessed light of heaven no more, shorn of his noble strength and forced to grind in prison. So it refers to a biblical story of Samson. And so here's an example. Samson is dedicated to God, and God gives him enormous strength. To honor God, Samson's hair is never cut. But evil people trick Samson and cut his hair, and he loses his strength. The evil people make Samson a slave and blind him. To get revenge, Samson asks God for enough strength to destroy the evil people. God gives him strength one last time, and Samson destroys the evil people and dies in the process. Longfellow compares the slaves in America to Samson. Okay, so keep that in mind. You have kind of quite a few things going on in this poem. The idea that Longfellow is talking about American slaves, okay, but he's relating them to Samson, and the idea that when his hair is cut, he loses his strength and he wants to avenge this act. Okay, how does the allusion to Samson in these lines affect the mood of the poem? Okay, because remember that when you make a reference without directly coming out and stating the story behind it, the story of Samson in this example, that's an allusion. Okay, some other examples of questions pertaining to this poem are comprehension questions. Just make sure that you have a good understanding of what this poem is trying to convey to the reader. And consider who the speaker is. Okay. This is a passage, it's an excerpt from a Cub pilot from Life on the Mississippi, and the author is Mark Twain. You've probably heard of this very famous author. And this is actually a personal narrative. There is one faculty which a pilot must incessantly cultivate until he's brought it to absolute perfection. Nothing short of perfection will do. That faculty is memory. He cannot stop with merely thinking a thing is so and so. He must know it, for this is one of the exact sciences. With what scorn a pilot was looked upon in the old times if he ever ventured to deal in the feeble phrase, I think, instead of the vigorous one, I know. One cannot easily realize what a tremendous thing it is to know every trivial detail of 1,200 miles of a river. So keep in mind, a pilot is not a pilot of a plane. Okay, they're on a river. So consider what the pilot would be referencing in this. And know it with absolute exactness. If you will take the longest street in New York and travel up and down it, coning its features patiently until you know every house and window and lamp post and big and little sign by heart, and know them so accurately that you can instantly name the one you are abreast of when you are set down at random in that street in the middle of an inky black night, and you will then have a tolerable notion of the amount and the exactness of a pilot's knowledge who carries the Mississippi River in his head. I think a pilot's memory is about the most wonderful thing in the world. To know the Old and New Testaments by heart and be able to recite them glibly, forward or backward, or begin at random anywhere in the book and recite both ways and never trip or make a mistake, is so extravagant mass of knowledge and no marvelous facility compared to a pilot's mass knowledge of the Mississippi and his marvelous facility in the handling of it. I make this comparison deliberately and believe I am not expanding the truth when I do it. Many will think my figure too strong, but pilots will not. When the apprentice has become pretty thoroughly acquainted with the river, he goes clattering along so fearlessly with his steamboat night or day that he presently begins to imagine that it is his courage that animates him. But the first time the pilot steps out and leaves him to his own devices, he finds out it was the other man's. He discovers that the article has been left out of his own cargo altogether. The whole river is bristling with dangers in a moment, and he is not prepared for them. He does not know how to meet them. All his knowledge forsakes him, and within 15 minutes he is as white as a sheet and scared almost to death. Therefore, pilots wisely train these cubs by various strategic tricks to look danger in the face a little more calmly. A cub is like an apprentice. A favorite way of theirs is to play a friendly swindle upon the candidate, and that's like a trick. Mr. Bigsby, my chief, served me in this fashion once, and for years afterward I used to blush, even in my sleep when I thought of it. I had become a good steersman, so good indeed that I had all the work to do on our watch, night and day. Mr. Bigsby seldom made a suggestion to me. All he ever did was to take the wheel on particularly bad nights or in particularly bad crossings, land the boat when she needed to be landed, play gentleman of leisure 9/10 of the watch, and collect the wages. The lower river was about bank full, and if anybody had questioned my ability to run my crossing between Cairo and New Orleans without help or instruction, I should have felt irreparably hurt. Well, one matchless summer's day, I was bowling down the bend above Island 66, brimful of self-conceit and carrying my nose as high as a giraffe's, when Mr. Bigsby said, "I am going below a while. I suppose you know the next crossing." This was almost an affront. It was about the plainest and simplest crossing in the whole river. One couldn't come to any harm, whether he ran it right or not. And as for depth, there never had been any bottom there. I knew all this perfectly well. Know how to run it? Why, I can run it with my eyes shut. How much water is there in it? Well, that is an odd question. I couldn't get bottom there with a church steeple. You think so, do you? The very tone of the question shook my confidence. That was what Mr. Bigsby was expecting. He left without saying anything more. I began to imagine all sorts of things. Mr. Bigsby, unknown to me, of course, sent somebody down to the forecastle with some mysterious instructions to the leadsman. Another messenger was sent to whisper among the officers, and then Mr. Bigsby went into hiding behind a smokestack, where he could observe results. Presently, the captain stepped out on the hurricane deck. Next to the chief mate appeared. Then a clerk. Every moment or two a straggler was added to the audience, and before I got to the head of the island, I had 15 or 20 people assembled down there under my nose. I began to wonder what the trouble was. As I started across, the captain glanced aloft at me and said, with a sham uneasiness in his voice, "Where is Mr. Bigsby?" "Gone below, sir." But that did the business for me. My imagination began to construct dangers out of nothing, and they multiplied faster than I could keep the run of them. All at once I imagined I saw shoal water ahead. The wave of coward agony that surged through me then came near, dislocating every joint in me. All my confidence in that crossing vanished. I seized the bell rope, dropped it, ashamed, seized it again, dropped it once more, clutched it tremblingly, won again, and pulled it so feebly that I could hardly hear the stroke myself. So consider, one, what makes Mr. Bigsby, how he's helped to change the narrator's thoughts, and how that adds to the suspense of the story, to the meaning of the story, and what Mr. Bigsby is sort of trying to take away from the narrator. Because the narrator is a little headstrong, a little conceited, and maybe he's trying to knock him down a peg.